which means peace be to you. Good evening. We are going to start. This is the topic, as you can see, is on extremism within different faiths and how to deal with it. We are going to start with Vijayalakshmi. Vijayalakshmi Nadal is a well-known investigative journalist and human rights activist. Many of you must have watched her speaking about the infiltration by Hindutva supremacists in front of the city and state legislatures all over the United States. Vijayalakshmi.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming here, and thank you for the esteemed guests on the table as well. The central idea behind this Parliament of World Religions is a call for conscience, defending freedom and human rights, and I agree very well with this. The image of Hindus, I would like to start this conversation with an insight into my own religion, which is Hinduism. Hinduism is something which nobody would have thought would be at the center of extremism, but with the present regime in India, it very much is. I would like to share some insights into this. So the image of Hindus throughout the world is meek, mild, and docile people who, in their conception of spirituality and refinement, would prefer if any foreign entity invades India to conquer them with love. And yet, 2014 and 2019 witnessed key elections in India, which is repositioning India as a Hindu majoritarian state which serves nationalism, authoritarianism, majoritarianism, and minoritization and populism on its menu. There is no option for secularism or inclusiveness here. Even the constitution, which has served the Indian democracy, which has provided it the framework for over 75 years, is sought to be displaced by the present regime. This Hindu majoritarian regime, envisaged by the religious politico-social organization called the RSS, or the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak, has metamorphosed into a paramilitary group and has normalized the use of anti-minority rhetoric, routine assertions of the imminent danger posed by internal as well as external enemies to the nation, and a systematic deployment of false claims and partisan facts with the help of internet and social media platforms besides the national media. The RSS, through its around 70,000 centers in India and several hundreds in countries like the USA and UK, Australia and Germany, to influence 32,000 Indians living abroad, not only foster existing communal racial differences amongst upper caste Hindus and aspirational lower caste groups and their minorities, but also aggravates it. This is being done not only to push for the idea of a Hindu nation by its centennial year of inception in 2025, it is also being done to keep the focus off of the failures to provide for its citizens and its brazen benevolence to the corporate sector by the present regime run by the political wing of the RSS called the BJP. A tall, dark, thin, and stately monk from India, Swami Vivekananda, in September 1893 had won hearts at the inaugural Parliament of World Religions, when his rich Indian voice echoed in the auditorium of the Parliament. He had then introduced Hinduism to America and called for religious tolerance and an end to fanaticism. But over the years, especially after 1999, the RSS has sought to appropriate not just Swami Vivekananda, but also the teachings of Hinduism to give it a political and communal color, calling it Hindutva. RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat, in the 125th anniversary of Swami Vivekananda's historic address, stated that it was the Swami who introduced Hindutva to the world. Nothing could be further from the truth. The term Hindutva was coined by the RSS when it was established in 1925. Though Hindutva means essence of Hinduism, the political connotations of both the RSS and Hindutva is dangerous, venomous, and communally charged. The difference between Hinduism as advocated by Swami Vivekananda and the RSS can be best enumerated by this one quote of Swami and the RSS chief. At one of the 6 speeches that Swami Vivekananda gave in Chicago in 1893, he stated, "Come on, O lions, and shake off the delusion that you are sheep. You are souls immortal, spirits free, blessed and eternal, ye are not smarter, ye are not bodies. Matter is not your servant, nor you the servant of matter." On the other hand, the RSS chief said at the 125th anniversary of the Swami that if a lion is alone, wild dogs can invade and destroy it. While Swami emphasized the positive aspects of all beings and the inclusiveness of the religion he practiced, the RSS chief exposed the crassness and divisiveness of his Hindutva by asking the Hindus to unite against their perceived internal enemies, Muslims and Christians. This negates everything that Swami Vivekananda stood for, who has stated that "I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe in not only universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true." He had stated that religion is not a crying necessity of India. One of his many moving aspects of his speech at Chicago was sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled the earth with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilization, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is now. But their time has come, and I fervently hope that the bell has tolled this morning. In honor of this convention, may be the death knell of all fanaticism, of all persecutions with the sword or the pen. Who would have known then that the very demons of fanaticism that he had called out that day would play out even more intensely in the name of the religion that he practiced by the fanatics, who pretend to extol him but yet twist everything that he preached to sanitize their own cruel agenda of divisiveness. The RSS, highly influenced by European fascism, has since then harbored the notion of a Hindu nation, even adopting violent means if necessary, in contrary to India's secular, inclusive, and peaceful democratic identity. Swami Vivekananda's advice to today's RSS would be: the Hindu must not give up on his religion, but keep religion within its proper limits and give freedom to society to grow. This brings me to the politics of today's India, where the Vedantic notion of a universal self residing within all of us is being pushed into the background against the notion of a separate and threatening other called Muslims, something he said over a century ago. Swami Vivekananda's parting note at the Parliament of World Religions has been: "I am a Hindu. I'm sitting in my own well and thinking that the whole world is my little well. This Christian sits in his little well and thinks the whole world is his well. The Mohammedan sits in his little well and thinks that's the whole world." I have to thank all of America for the great attempt you're making to break down the barriers of this little world of ours, and hope that in the future the Lord will help you to accomplish the purpose. This was said by him at the inaugural address of the World Parliament. Now, a quarter of a century later, this message is still relevant. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the leader of BJP was right in saying the spirit of his speech has the potential to create a more just, prosperous, and inclusive planet, and yet he's at the crux of becoming an extreme right-wing dictator, powering Hindu fanaticism, threatening not just India but the rest of the world as well. a complete antithesis of the message that Swami Vivekananda gave to the world at this very parliament in 1893. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijayalakshmi, for that enlightening speech. Our next speaker is Reverend Mark Lukens. Reverend Mark Lukens, OCC, Order of Corpus Christi. Reverend Mark Lukens has recently retired as the pastor of Bethany Congregational Church on the South Shore of Long Island and an associate executive director of Venture Together, a human service agency in New York. A lifelong activist for human rights and social justice in the tradition of the United Church of Christ, Reverend Lukens also serves on the board of the Interfaith Institute of Long Island, a multi-faith organization promoting understanding and peace, and located in the Islamic Center of Long Island and the former chair of the Interfaith Alliance of Long Island. He has authored numerous articles on topics ranging from the separation of church and state, interfaith outreach, and issues of homelessness, disabilities, and race. He was a presenter at the Parliament of World Religions Faith Against Hate campaign and at the 2015 Parliament in Salt Lake City on religio-political terrorism movements in the United States. Reverend Lukens.
Thank you. This is odd. I'm holding the two of these things. I feel like I've got like an ice cream pop in my hand or something. I'm tempted to lick it, but I promise I won't. So thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here, as it always is. I think I could almost say, to begin, what she said. Just take out Hindu, put in Christian. But I promise I'll be a little more specific about that. When I first gave this talk at or something similar, as Simi was saying, at the Parliament of World Religions 8 years ago, even then, a lot of folks were dismissing the idea of Christian domestic terrorism in the United States. But I remind you, as I begin my presentation, of the words of Sinclair Lewis from 1930, who wrote, "When fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross." And those words have turned out to be prescient, even more so than they were 8 years ago or 90 years ago when Sinclair Lewis wrote his text, especially here in the United States. And while Islamic extremism may get more attention from the media and until very recently from law enforcement, many of whom, I'm afraid, have turned out to be sympathetic, if not actively involved, to what the Christian movement, terrorist movement that we now call Christian nationalism. And one of the point I want to make here in my speaking is these Christian nationalism and the religious terrorism associated with fringe Christianity, these movements are intersectional. They're part of one a philosophical idea. So this is very important for us to understand. And this movement is not only alive and flourishing, as we can see, it is growing and has now, 8 years ago when I gave this talk, I said, these Christian nationalism is already appearing in fringe political parties. But now we see that it's entered the mainstream. The Republican Party itself has become more and more associated with Christian nationalism, as well as policies that privilege white and wealthy citizens and demonize and exploit those who violate the cultural norms that are associated with what they consider to be a Christian culture and a Christian nation. But make no mistake about it, and this is very important, the values of Christian nationalism not only run contrary to the pluralism and the diversity that has been a hallmark of our republic, aspirationally, if not in actual practice, it is profoundly anti-democratic and opposed to the core concepts, especially the separation of church and state, equality before the law, and even the rule of law itself when it runs contrary to the fulfillment of the goals of the movement, which is ultimately the development of theocratic society based on a merger of religious fundamentalism, political authoritarianism, and in its manifestations in Christianity, particularly in the America, in white privilege. Because in its aims and in its ideology, Christian nationalism is every bit as violent and dangerous as any other authoritarian movement, not only to civil and religious liberties, but, and this is why I'm here, to the heart and soul of the gospel itself. In my opinion, Christian nationalism is a direct attack on Christianity itself, on what we call the red letter words of Jesus. And just as we've seen in the last 7 or 8 years in particular, it is a movement that has now become more pervasive than many of us realize. It has already accelerated and become mainstream. It's already part of our national dialogue. It's something we already have to deal with. Of course, this is not strictly a contemporary phenomenon. Contrary to the gospel, dualism and religiously sanctioned violence have been part of the Christian story from its very beginnings. We cannot change that if we will not admit it. Christianity went from a sect of Judaism to a religion in the context of an empire. And in our sacred texts are unquestionably found what scholars today call texts of terror, passages that sowed the seeds of religiously sanctioned violence and have come to characterize too much, frankly, of the history of our church, especially after the inevitable process of enculturating and ultimately sacralizing political, ethnic, and racial agendas and infusing them with the kind of triumphalism that is necessary for the building of empires, but is also leads to abominations like the Crusades, the Inquisition, the Holocaust, slavery, and genocide against indigenous peoples, just to name a few. Today's Christian nationalism is a contemporary version of the same ideas. It reawakened in the civil rights era as the civil rights movement was seen as an attack on the God-given and sanctified institutions of Jim Crow in the South. And as these were challenged by people of color, many of them Christian clerics themselves, the movement emerged from the shadows and was breathed into full flower, kind of like a death lily. I don't know if anybody knows what a death lily is. It blooms about once every 7 years and it smells like rotting flesh. That's my editorial analogy, for whatever I can say. By cultural and economic shifts that have led many people in the United States, to cling to whiteness as they cling to authoritarian versions of Christianity out of a sense of desperation, a reaction against the shifting sands of contemporary culture and the diversity of modern society, which is inherency as the crumbling of the world that was and the end of what should be theirs, but which no longer is. And like extremists of other traditions, adherents of what we call the Christian right or Christian nationalism see themselves not as conquerors or exploiters, but as besieged and persecuted defenders of divine authority and the God-given social order, locked in an apocalyptic struggle with the demonic forces represented in their eyes by other religions, other racial and ethnic groups, by government, and indeed by the increasingly multicultural nature of our society and our world. A struggle in which there is no neutrality and in which only one side can win. And that is the challenge for the Christian community, I believe, and indeed for all people, frankly, of faith and good conscience. A struggle not only for a civil society which reflects our shared values of pluralism, equality before the law, religious and civil liberty, but as Christians, we are in the battle for the soul of our faith itself. So what do we do about it? I think we begin by recognizing extremism does not happen in a vacuum. It is bred in fear, in despair, and in ignorance. To fight extremism, we have to fight those fears. We have to show and desperation. We have to invest in education and economic opportunity. We have to encourage our human investment in the institutions of civil society. One of the first things that we find in a cult situation, those institutions are the enemy. And part of the authoritarian movement towards the realization of our goals is to break down those institutions. We see that happening now in the United States. We don't trust the press anymore. We don't trust the government. We don't trust anything but our particular funneled news silo that we live in. And by news, I mean opinions, depending on, and I don't think any of us is entirely guilt-free in this matter. But that's not the point. What we have emerged is a system, a media system, that prevents interaction and discussion rather than promoting it. How do you have it, for example, how do you have a discussion with someone who tells you Jewish space lasers are the reason that, something, I forget what it was related to now, it was so silly, but it was something to do with climate or something, fires or something like that. You can't have a discussion with people. We are ending more and more balkanized into our own groups. I think we have to be visible within our faith communities. We have to stand up and challenge ideas and claims that are inconsistent with other faiths. And I think that we in many religious communities, under the guise of respect, there is a point where you have to say that is wrong and evil, and that is not what our faith says. And we have to be willing to do that. We have to show up and we have to speak up. We Christians need to be the first ones to condemn extremism done in our name, publicly and from our pulpits. And we need to be the ones to tell our congregations, our neighbors, the media, not only that extremists do not represent our faith, but that the extremists who claim other faiths do not represent those faiths either. That means we have to remind people in our Christian community, for instance, that Christian nationalism is a heresy and it is an abomination. And we have to say it loud and often. We need to fight for the independence of religious from civil institutions. The merger of the two is bad not only for the state, but for our faith as well. Because what happens is that we become servants of the state rather than servants of God. A violation of certainly, I'm sure, and I think I can risk speaking for most Christian traditions, a violation of our ordination vows. And we have to recognize that cultural hegemony sacralizes political agendas, extremists and others, and contributes to the mentality of fear and suspicion. We have to reach out beyond our walls and set up joint responses to conflict. I want to brag just for a minute, and because before I conclude, we're talking about this group a little bit, because I got involved with this group 25 years ago in Long Island after the Matthew Shepard atrocity. And one of my confirmation students came in and said to me, "Why do those people hate us?" And I said, "Okay, which people?" And he said, "Those Muslims. Why do they hate us?" So I said, I tried to give him an explanation, but I said, why don't we call them? So we called the mosque, the Islamic Center, and they invited us over. So we all came over, and they fed us, and they told us about their faith, and they invited us to witness the prayer. Those personal contact, and here we are, I've known these people here for 20 years now, 25 years. Those relationships are key, because one of the things we need to be for each other is a kind of a firehouse. In Long Island, the Interfaith Institute has enabled us to show up for each other, and that's somebody attacks a mosque, Jews are there, Christians are there. We're there to defend our sisters and brothers. A menorah was vandalized. the newspapers came and there was a bunch of Muslims standing out in front, offering comfort, offering protection. That is how we begin to break those patterns. And most importantly, we have to come together, each for the others, as I was just saying. We always have to recognize that there, but for fortune go I, that the winds can swing, and it may be Simi's faith, it may be her faith, it may be Sheikh's faith this week, but next week it could be mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. As usual, you are a great defender of human rights and a great activist that I'm honored to have known you for such a long time.
Thank you. And see, we gotta give each other our strokes, because we ain't getting them anywhere else.
Our next speaker is Father Cedric Prakash. Father Cedric Prakash is a Catholic priest belonging to the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits. The Jesuits are well known all over the world for their engagement in education and social concern. Father Prakash is based in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, India, and is well known the world over for his grassroots and advocacy work on human rights, justice, reconciliation, and peace issues. In the wake of the Gujarat carnage of 2002, he was in the forefront of highlighting the plight of the Muslims of Gujarat. He is still involved in a relentless campaign to ensure justice for the victim survivors. In June 2002, he testified before the USURF in Washington. In 2003, the Indian Muslim Council awarded him the Rafi Ahmed Kidwai Award, and he has been awarded numerous awards. They're too numerous for me to name right now. In 2006, he held the Wade Chair at Marquette University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His expertise includes the Constitution of India, social analysis, contextual spirituality, and the rights of excluded and marginalized communities. Today, he is deeply involved in several human rights issues in India. He is also a much sought-after speaker and group facilitator in India and abroad. Father Cedric Prakash.
Thank you so much, Simi, for that very elaborate introduction. Thank you, Sheikh Ubaid, and all at Aspire for inviting me. My dear fellow panelists, Vijaya and Reverend Mark, and my friends here gathered. Some of them I know for a long time. From one Christian priest to another. But I'm going to bring a different perspective. It was sometime before Christmas in 2002. It was a little after that terrible violence where we had 2,000 Muslims killed on our streets in Ahmedabad. I lost some of my closest friends, like the former Member of Parliament, Ishan Jaffrey. And we had done a lot of work. We put up the Citizens Tribunal, headed by Justice Krishna Iyer, and then that has been on record in the Supreme Court. We say Mass every day as Catholic priests, but that was a Sunday Mass that I was staying in a small community in the parish that I belonged to, Catholics. Very few Gujaratis, namely from different parts of India, originally maybe from Bombay or Goa or Mangalore or Kerala and so on. So it was, I think, those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. People feel very uncomfortable when I preach. Some have written to the Pope to stop me from saying Mass and even from preaching in churches, you know. So I began. It was a mic like this. We don't have this lapel mics. So I came across the altar and I asked this 300 plus crowd gathered there, who are the biggest terrorists in the world today? Some were looking at the moon, some were looking that side, some were looking at their watch, all kinds of things. It was a very, very uncomfortable question, and they did not want to be trapped. Finally, one honest Christian, Prince of the Mass, said, "Father, the Muslims, of course." I said, "Thank you for that." I said, "I congratulate you because you have had the courage to say aloud in this church what you really feel about. Okay? But I want to tell you, I don't agree with you. And people were looking at me, they were turning, they were squirming, they were very uncomfortable. And so I said, do you know the world wars? World War I and II. Do you know which were the groups that were involved? Do you know about Hitler, which religion he professed, and how he exterminated 6 million Jews? I spoke here. The American Jewish Council here in America are giving legitimacy to Modi. Okay? And I showed them the textbooks where Hitler gave us dignity to the German race. He lent prestige to them, and nothing about the annihilation of 6 million Jews. I said, do you know anything about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? And who did on August 9th and August 6th and August 9th, the big fat bomb killing hundreds and thousands of people? Do you know what has happened in Vietnam and Cambodia and Cuba and Bosnia and Iraq? Do you know the religion that people wear up their sleeve? Those who control the arms and ammunition industry? Visit the CIPRI.org, the Stockholm Institute of Peace Research, the Stockholm Peace Research Institute, and you'd see who are the biggest arm producers and the arm peddlers in the world. I was working there in the Middle East, and so I brought photos. I didn't bring the actual cell. The border immigration would not have allowed me to come in. So I took out photos, and I brought it to the State Department. And they said, it showed Lockheed and Martin. And these were the bombs that were being shelled on the people in Syria by the ISIS. And who's giving ISIS? So the State Department officials, because working with the Jesuit Refugee Service, obviously said, Father, come on. We don't give the ISIS any arms and ammunition. I said, of course. You don't give it. And I believe you. But do you know who's your biggest arms buyer? Saudi Arabia. You look at the millions and billions of dollars of arms and ammunition, and where does it go? Oh, that's none of our business. Of course it's none of your business, because you don't care. Why I'm saying all this is that the extremism is multidimensional. It has discrimination, divisiveness. It has hate. It has violence. These are the three dimensions of son. So, I can discriminate against you. I can look the other side, okay, because the color of your skin, or because the religion, the hijab you wear, and so on. That is already extremism. It can be hate. It can be I hate you, I dislike you. In the first, I need not hate, okay? And I abuse you. And it's happening so much. And finally is the violence. And we see violence being institutionalized, and we see violence being legitimized in so many different parts of the world, including the so-called Christian country of the United States, and my country, of course. Pope Francis addressed the US Congress some years ago, in 2016, I think. And he said very, very clearly, he said, here we have to ask ourselves, why are deadly weapons being sold to those who inflict untold suffering on individuals and society? Sadly, the answer, as we all know, is simply for money. Money that is drenched in blood, often innocent blood. In the face of the shameful and culpable silence, it is our duty to confront the problem and to stop the arms trade. And later on, even he said, what shall remain in the wake of this war? The war that is going on now in Ukraine, in the midst of which we are living now. Ruins, thousands of children without education, so many innocent victims, and lots of money in the pockets of arms dealers. A war can be justified, so to speak, with many, many reasons. But when all the world is as it is today at war, piecemeal, though that war may be, a little here, a little there, and everywhere, there is no justification. And God weeps. Jesus weeps. That is what Pope Francis is saying. And the point is, even as Christians, we are so selective, even when we read the Gospel of Jesus, everywhere. We legitimize, even our bishops in India have written open letters to the bishops of India. Okay, you cannot be selective in what is happening. Say, denying Muslim girls their hijab in India, that is violence. Denying education when they wear the hijab for school. Using words like love jihad, narcotic jihad, I've taken it up. Okay, of course they don't like me, but that's irrelevant. But when you make words like this, when you do not know what the gospel of Jesus tells you, to love one another, then I think there is something systemically wrong with Christianity, with our faith. Because Jesus takes a stand. Throughout his public life, whether it is a woman caught in adultery, it's a violent, and there is a famous Gujarati Hindu poet, Niranjan Bhagat, who wrote a beautiful poem called Patthar Tartar Druje. Even as these people were going to stone that woman who was caught in adultery, the stones were weeping. The hand was shaking. And I think these are things that we need if we are thinking that many of us are Christians. We follow the way of Jesus. The only way is love. The only way is the acceptance of the other. That doesn't mean to say we don't have to take a stand. I've been here talking to many groups today, many individuals, and what is happening in India is today religious extremism by the Hindutva, not by Hinduism, okay, by the Hindutva factions there who are out to make of India by 2025 a Hindu nation state based on the Hindutva ideology, which is fascist, which has drawn its inspiration from the fascism of Mussolini, from the apartheid of South Africa, and from the Nazism of Germany. I think it is important for us, those who profess to believe in the person and message of Jesus, to take a stand for any kind of extremism, any kind of hate, any kind of violence. Where do you go? We go. Look at the way children are indoctrinated, what they're showing on TV. A lot of the serials that come in India today, are very, very violent. Today I live in a Jesuit school, and the little boys play a very traditional game during the recess. It's called Chor Police, robbers and thieves. So one group goes and catches. These are all Hindu boys playing. We have a lot of Hindu boys, and we also have some Muslim boys and some Christian boys in our school. Now the whole nomenclature has changed. It's no longer Chor Police, now it is Hindu Muslim. And the Hindu will always beat up the Muslim because he's an Attakvadi, he's a terrorist, he's an extremist, and he deserves to be. And these are the games. Middle class children who come from well-to-do families, who will come to the United States to migrate and get all their degrees from the United States and get the benefit from here, are playing today in our Jesuit school in Ahmedabad, kids 10 and 11 and 12 years. So we need to address it. We have to address what children see, the game children play, the violence that is being permeated, and even the toys. The most favorite, I was in Lebanon, the most popular toy to give a child at Christmas, which goes for hotcakes, is one of the tut guns. Every little boy and even girl wants that gun. It's no longer Barbie dolls and so on. So the point is, we have allowed extremism, we have loved differentiation, we have loved hate to permeate. There are groups, Reverend Mark has spoken enough, here in the United States. Finally, there are also draconian laws. Some years ago, Ila Gandhi, the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, invited me to speak in South Africa, in Durban, on the 100 years of Satyagraha. And my talk there was pushing the Muslim to the brink. You incarcerate a person, you deaden, you beat him up or her up, you create all kinds of electronic surveillance, you create disgust, hate, you're pushing the person to the brink. And that is not acceptable by Christianity, We had Guantanamo Bay. I protested some years ago at the School of Americas in Fort Benning at Georgia. You know, that where this thing forming military dictators of South America to kill their old people. Saint Oscar Romero was killed by one of those people, trained by America. A great Jesuit, Rutulio Grande, was also killed in El Salvador. From the university there in San Salvador, the Jesuits were killed. But once you institutionalize violence, once you institutionalize hate, extremism, then I think a lot is lost. So today, I am hoping that we are few of us, we have spoken a lot. This session should be a call to say no more to hate, no more to violence, and no more to any form of extremism. Jesus told us, love one another as I have loved you. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Thank you, Father Cedric Prakash. It's an honor to have you here for your powerful speech. Thank you. Rabbi Michael Davis was supposed to be here to speak from the Jewish perspective, and unfortunately he couldn't make it, so I'm just going to read his speech that he sent us. I was asked to step in to fill in for a last-minute cancellation at this panel today. I am delighted to support the work being done by Sheikh Ubaid and so many others on this important topic. I beg your apology for not being here. I am spending the last full week of the summer break in planned activities with my school-age children. They go back to school next week. I therefore was unable to be here with you in person. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rabbi Michael Davis. I grew up in Israel. Since coming here from Israel 25 years ago, I have spoken and acted regularly in Chicago, across the United States. I support full equal rights for Palestinians living under Israeli control. I support BDS, the Palestinian call for us to boycott the Israeli military and its occupation of the West Bank. My old career as a synagogue rabbi ended because of my support for full democracy in Israel-Palestine. Our task today is to denounce the violent extremists within our respective faith communities. I was specifically asked to call out those Jews who support Islamophobia. Islamophobia is real and needs to be called out by all good people. As a vocal ally of the Palestinian Muslim community in Chicago, I appreciate the importance of countering this kind of religious hatred. However, I struggle to take ownership of whichever Jew may be promoting this kind of hatred. Who is my faith community? Judaism, like any other religion, has many variants. And many Jews are not in religious communion or have any social connections with other Jews who are too different from us. We draw together when faced with external threats, such as anti-Semitism, but otherwise we go about our own business with like-minded others who share our beliefs. This kind of differentiation within a supposed unitary group is not unique to Jews. To draw on the example of the dominant religious culture in the United States, I don't see much connectedness across the faith for the various branches of Christianity. In just one instance, how many Western Christians are in religious communion with the Middle Eastern Copts? The Copts are approximately 20 million strong and one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, established close to the birthplace of Christianity. Yet, how many Western Christians even know of the Copts' existence? Closer to home, how many Protestants feel responsible as Christians for the Catholic priesthood's well-publicized sexual violence crisis with regard to children? Jews, like Christians, like any other religion, are comprised of different groups defined by diverging, if not contradictory, faiths, lifestyles, and observances. To the point that different Jews really don't know each other or feel in spiritual communion with each other, just like any other religion. What kind of Jew am I? In terms of lifestyle, place of residence, observance, and affinity groups, and more, the clearest religious culture I can say I am part of is what is sometimes called Judeo-Christianity. Your average liberal Jew is more likely to have prayed in a church than to have ever stepped foot in an Orthodox synagogue. And the liberal Christians liberal Jews live with, break bread with, or are even married to, are more likely to have prayed in the local suburban Reform synagogue than in most types of Christian churches that are just too different from their own. We middle-class Jews and Christians are much closer to each other than to most of our putative co-religionists. But our real shared spaces are not churches or synagogues. Famously, these are increasingly poorly attended or even empty. The percentage of non-Orthodox Jews who regularly attend religious services is in the low single digits. Where I live, this Judeo-Christianity is not lived as a shared religion, but as a shared culture. This is a secularized Judeo-Christian culture. After all, the vast majority of Jews are atheist or agnostic, as are many of our Christian neighbors in suburbia. We are culturally this or that, but religiously not much of anything at all. We meet at the public schools, farmers' markets, and other neighborhood gatherings as neighbors, not as co-religionists. Since we are secularized Judeo-Christians are not religious, we certainly are not religious extremists. So I will engage with 3 questions. What is our responsibility as secularized Judeo-Christians for religious hatred and violence? Where do we have agency and therefore responsibility? What can I say here at the World Parliament of Religions that is worth saying in this forum because it is not being said elsewhere? Liberals are indeed not religious extremists, but paradoxically, we do have a religious extremism problem. And I believe the biggest religious extremism problem of any group in America. Let me explain. Liberals, whether believers in a theistic, supernatural God or atheists or anything in between, are ideologically incapable of seeing homicidal religious faith for what it is. This becomes evident when they seek to explain religious extremism in terms of their secular values, not in its own terms. The answer that is given to the question, why is there religious terrorism, Islamic, domestic Christian, Hindu, etc., is not because of their religious faith. Rather, it's because of poverty or a lack of general education. Statements like these have become a liberal catechism. They continue to be made notwithstanding all the profession of religious motivation by the perpetrators of religious violence or any other evidence to the contrary. And there is plenty of such evidence. The 9/11 hijackers were not poor or poorly educated. Quite the contrary. They were well-heeled, well-educated, and well-connected. Yet, they committed suicide and mass murder anyway. Why? Really, why? It's simple. They said it themselves, because of their religious faith. The most militant Israeli settlers on the West Bank often come from privileged backgrounds. Yet, they act with wanton violence and criminality against innocent Palestinians. Why? Because, as they scream it out loud, because of their religious faith. On Wednesday, January 6, 2021, I sat in front of my computer, watching the attempted coup unfold in Washington, D.C. Thousands of Americans gathered around a large crucifix they had erected outside the U.S. Capitol. Brandishing Bibles, they stormed the U.S. Capitol. 7 people were killed, and American democracy took a body blow. Once they had taken control of the Senate chamber, these religious rioters offered up a solemn prayer to Jesus Christ from the dais. They filmed themselves doing all this, and I saw the footage, as I know many of you have. I know that the Christians in the room are way ahead of me in denouncing this horror, this travesty of their own faith. Why did they erect a giant crucifix? Why did they charge the building brandishing Bibles? And why did they gather in calm solemnity to pray in the ransacked Senate chamber? It certainly wasn't because they lost their jobs or didn't go to college. Many of them were college educated and solidly middle class. They worshipped while committing insurrection against the United States because that is who they are. How does the secular media distort the conversation about religious extremism? In the following 2+ years since the January 6th riot, the media reporting downplayed or completely eliminated the religious dimension of the riot. Similarly, the Congressional Record removed religious from the debate. All of the footage of crucifixes, Bibles, and Christian prayer that I saw on January 6th, 2021 was scrubbed from the famous congressional videos. Gone. In academia, University of Chicago professor Robert Pape prepared an influential and widely reported survey of the insurrectionists' motives for their crimes. His ambitious goal, as he wrote in the foreword to his January 5th, 2022 report, was to inform and shape the Biden administration's policies. To that end, Professor Pape assembled a team of some 30 researchers. They went out and interviewed hundreds of January 6th insurrectionists. These social scientists gathered data and answers on the mob's socioeconomic, political, and other motivations. But notwithstanding all the religious imagery and words at the riot, this team never even asked the question about religion. Why? 2 weeks ago, the perpetrator of the worst massacre of Jews on American soil, the October 27, 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue murderers, was sentenced to death. His motives for killing 11 Jews at prayer were explicitly religious. As the Harvard Divinity School Journal reported, the murderer quoted from the New Testament and spoke in other uniquely Christian ways. Yet, again, the media has consistently barely mentioned his religious motive, if at all. His motivation for killing Jews at prayer in synagogue is typically cast in the media as a secular racial crime. Why? Secular people miss the obvious because they can't see what they don't know. How can secular people understand the potency and menace of religious faith when they have never experienced such faith themselves, and when they have never met anybody who has? In the years ahead, children who were too young to witness these events will grow into adults who will not know of the role of religious extremism in these acts of mass violence, thus perpetuating the cycle of ignorance. The reason why middle-class, overwhelmingly white, secular, Judeo-Christian, I am dispensing with the hyphenated term. When you are less than 2% of the population, you don't get to have equal say by act of hyphenation. So, let me try that again. The reason why middle-class, largely white, liberal Christian opinions matter so much is because this is still a Christian country. And by sheer virtue of numbers, the dominant group dominates public conversation through the institutions of the media, academia, and more. This is where we as Americans have agency and therefore responsibility. This is what is largely not being said elsewhere. But this is something which I hope the World Parliament of Religions can say. We, if nobody else, should take religious people's words at face value and reflect that in our conversations and idea. Religion matters. If we don't begin to take extremist religion seriously, if we can't name it, how can we ever hope to begin to deal with it? Let's start calling out religious violence for what it is. The media and academia need to stop whitewashing the religious motivation of white Christian domestic terrorism. First, we need the language to describe this reality. Then, introspection will follow. Thank you for your attention. Rabbi Michael Davis. Now, I will conclude by introducing the person who was responsible for coming up with the idea for these sessions, Dr. Sheikh Ubaid. He's a well-known human rights activist and anti-war activist. He is the founder of many coalitions such as Alliance to Save and Protect America from Infiltration by Religious Extremists, the Coalition Against Genocide, and others, and also the founder of Indian Muslim Council. Dr. Sheikh Ubaid.
Thank you, Simi, and all the esteemed panelists and the attendees. I greet you with the Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. And last parliament in the US, which was in Salt Lake City, where I had the honor of listening to and sharing the dais with Reverend Mark Lukens and Chaplain Simi Ahmed, along with others. I had a similar topic, and I started with the a modified Islamic declaration that Muslims have to, declaration of faith, that I bear witness that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, and that I denounce ISIS and I denounce Al-Qaeda and I denounce all the Muslim terrorists, because the Muslims have been under so much pressure to say this. So I was trying to make a point. We came up with this idea of having a session where we share our struggles against extremism in our own communities because of very important reasons. Extremists are not born extremists. The mass murderers and rapists that Father Cedric Prakash described and witnessed on the streets of Gujarat, where pregnant women, 9 months pregnant women, their bellies were slit open, and full-term, I will call them infants, were ripped out with the tip of the sword. Those people were not born extremists and killers. So what turns people into extremists and killers? We have to deal with that. And this extremism is not limited to any particular community. But what happens, like Father Cedric described, that the Christian community responded that, well, the biggest terrorists are Muslims. But if you go and ask a Muslim congregation, they say, well, 9/11 was staged. Many of them will say that. Well, Muslims could not have done that. Because if you have this concept that my community cannot be extremist, last time the Parliament of World Religions, when the Buddhist speaker had to back out because there was tremendous pressure on him, the Buddhist community started telling him that Buddhists are so peaceful, the religion is so peaceful that they cannot be. And this was after one of the worst genocides I call it, a recurrent genocide, because it started in 1964 and it happens in spurts because the world keeps forgetting about it. The genocide of Rohingyas, it's not 2014, started around 1948, and then 64 was a big one, and then periodically. So so we said, well, unless every religion comes out and own its extremism, the youth who are going to fall prey to the extremist will continue to do that. And the other thing is, the reason for people becoming extremists are different in different religions. For example, there is no history of forced conversion in Judaism. Judaism does not believe in conversion, forced conversion. But we see what's happening in Israel. We see the money that flows from Brooklyn and Florida to these violent settlers, the way they treat Palestinians, even calling them, cockroaches and things like treating them like that. So there is a different reason for their extremism, so it has to be dealt accordingly. The Christian extremism in the past was to save souls. So not just the crusades that happened in the Middle East, but even the northern crusades, where, Baltics and northern Russia and Scandinavia was brought under Christianity, was to save souls, Similarly, when Muslim youth, when you deal with them, even though no matter what some of the Western media and the Hindutva media says that Islam spread by sword that happened in India, it's not going to resonate with them, because the history of extremism in Islam is not so much against non-Muslim as it is between them. There's various sects. That's why many sociologists and historians say that Islam has the most tolerant history, relatively speaking, compared to others, because irrespective of what the propagandists say, even the Prophet Muhammad was told, your job is to convey the message, you are not there to convert people. So we are, but the extremism that is there in Islam was there from almost the very beginning. And the thing that's peculiar to Islam is that it has a unique way of dealing with this extremism. So unless we know this, we will not be able to tackle the extremism that is seen in the Muslim community. Because of the geopolitical situation, Muslim youth are very suspicious of those who are trying to work against extremism because of the vast number of what I would call house Negroes, as Malcolm X would have called them, doing the job of the administration of the military-industrial complex here or of the government in India. But because of my background as being an anti-war activist and for human rights activists, especially for Indian Muslims, that will not stick to me. So I had lots of debates and worked when ICLI and others were trying to reach out and do interfaith work. Before 9/11, there was this youth movement in America called Hizb ut-Tahrir, and they were winning elections and controlling the Muslim Students Association from Colombia to everywhere. Because what happened, there was this unique factors of the youth getting upset that their parents were very afraid of saying anything for Palestinians or taking a stand against. So said they did not respect their parents. So their extremism was mostly a political kind of extremism, and we dealt with them. We had lots of debates. We made sure that doesn't spread, but it was not done in the UK. So you saw thousands and thousands of youngsters from UK going to Syria to join ISIS. So those who say that Muslims cannot be extremists, just look at the numbers and you will see that Muslims can be extremists and Muslims are extremists. And so but why is that happening becomes a very important. Similarly, recently the same type of people started to come on Twitter Spaces, and I wrote to the Muslim leadership in India. I said, we have to watch what's happening because of the tremendous repression happening on the Indian Muslims. There is tremendous anger, there's tremendous desperation because people are lynched left and right every day. Muslims are not allowed to pray. They are not, allowed to give out, the call to prayer. They are not allowed to travel freely in the trains because if they are eating meat, even if it's, mutton or even if it's, poultry meat, they are accused of eating beef, which by the way not illegal, and they are lynched. So when there's so much desperation, it's very easy for them in their anger to fall victim to violence. So that is why we thought that we should have a session where each community representative should come forward and not only denounce extremism, like I try to make a point by denouncing extremism as part of my declaration. That's not enough. We have to find out why our youth are becoming extremist. Unless similarly the spread of white Christian supremacy has to be also dealt with, the economic condition in the US, how that is being exploited by, just not the hatred, but also the poverty, etc., that you see is being exploited so much that the youth do not even realize that by supporting Republican extremists, they are working against their own interest because they are not the one who are going to do anything for the poor. I have sometimes the debates being a physician, luckily not as much with the youth as with the older generation who are against Obamacare, and I say, it's not the greatest thing, but it is much better than, I'm getting paid less, but it is good for you. So the whole reason why we came up with this was to come up with very thoughtful presentations and scholarly presentations that we just heard, because each community has different reasons for extremism, and each community has extremism. Extremism is a human problem. By nature, we are xenophobic. For thousands of years, we were always suspicious of a new group coming towards us from the horizon. So we are wired to be xenophobic. It is education and it is meeting one another, like Reverend Mark said, knowing the other that helps us bring down that xenophobia and become more human. But when the economic conditions are bad, or when there is demographic change happening, then troublemakers and rival rousers come and very easily spread hatred. And almost 25 years ago, when Newsweek was interviewing me, I had said that it's very easy for us to bring out the genie or the gin of hatred from the bottle, but once that happens, it's very, very difficult to put it back in. And that's what is happening in the country of my birth, Father Cedric's country. And it's strange that it's just not, the fear of losing your numerical superiority or losing your economic status, just propaganda of happening that can also change people into becoming extremists. India can never be a Muslim majority state in even 1,000 years, but these Hindutva youth militants think that Muslims are going to overtake them in the next coming decades, and they fall victim to it. Same thing happened in Germany. There was a different thing that Jews were blamed for the economic condition and for the loss in the battle. So I changed my speech, and I started to talk about these factors because I just had a debate here a couple of hours ago where these issues were coming up. I said I have to just explain why we are having this session. Is just not about talking about history or just denouncing extremism, but we have to approach it very scientifically, and only then we will come up with a very comprehensive strategy to fight and defeat extremism, especially in the youth, so that the oxygen supply to these violent movements, whether they are ultra-nationalist, supremacist movement or religious extremist movements, be cut off. So I hope that we have able to achieve that. And I once again thank you so very much. Father Cedric, 2002, you came, and in the very first convention that IMC, we had the concept of this convention to bring all the faiths together, to spend a couple of days together. And then we took you a meeting with the New York Times editor, Washington Post editor, editorial board of Newsday, you and the late Praful Pidwai. And Reverend Mark, for decades, have been such a great source of inspiration and support, coming to every public program we have against Islamophobia or against Hindutva extremism. And I thank you very much. And Vijay Lakshmi Nadar, with her track record of investigative journalism and passion for human rights, had been going around speaking in different city and state legislatures, talking about the rise of Hindutva, the infiltration of Hindutva. That's why we have this new alliance, because every year 500,000 Indians come, which makes me very happy, to the US, but almost 70% of them are supporters of Hindutva. So this is a problem that in 10 years will be almost uncontrollable. So we want to start talking about, just like, we do not allow any extremists from other religions to come in here. We have to keep an eye on that. Otherwise here, like we happened, the parliament came under lots of pressure to just close down 2 of the human rights organizations' booth by these extremists here. So you can see the infiltration here. The Professor Trushki gets rape threats and death threats on a routine, as a routine, just because she's speaking out against that's her job. She's teaching South Asian history. So they are getting so powerful in the US, and we see that there will be one more violent extremism to deal with in this country. So that was one of the reasons we have this alliance. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Obed, and all the speakers, and thank you all for taking time to come here and listen to all these wonderful speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
If there are any questions, we will be.
Questions?
You spoke of addressing these extremists within the religions that they are operating within, the cause of their violent actions. Is the best way to do that to undermine the, let's say, corrupted interpretations of the religion that they are using to enact these violence, or to try and meet them where they're at and talk them backwards into a better understanding?
Well, that's a really good question, frankly. I can just, from my own experience, what I found, because in my own congregation, because most Christian congregations are a mixture of people, an emphasis on, it's a mistake to assume that, and Christian ministers do this all the time, assume that people are, that they're not sophisticated enough to understand theology. And I served a working class congregation. I did not find that to be true at all. I found them to be very intuitively understanding. And so they were, what I always speak through Scripture and through the eyes of faith. And I don't attack people, and when I'm dealing, I believe you have to name the powers, but evangelical Christianity is not the problem. The problem is these particular ideas within Christianity, which are in evangelical churches brought more forth. I think you deal with the theology with an open hand, because you have to live what you're talking about. And that's hard sometimes because people are really irritating. But you have to, but that's how you do it. You approach it from the theology, and you don't approach, as Sheikh was talking about, or the father actually even more so, you approach people through their faith and don't talk to them about pluralism or things like that. What did Jesus say? Who's our prime guy? I think that's the only way I found that it's been effective with people. And I'm not saying it's a miracle cure, but it's somewhere we can go. So thank you for the question.
And I will just, even dealing with the Muslim extremism in the youth, talking about this abstract things and the modern concepts will not be so helpful. What the Prophet did becomes very, very important. So that's why for this, when we were talking to these youths in the 1990s, I would ask, the Prophet said that if there was this alliance that he was part of, anti-war alliance before he became the Prophet, Hilful Fudul, if that alliance would come back into existence, he would join it. So there's a, why are you joining during the Bosnian genocide? Why are you trying to join, invite others, non-Muslims who are white Europeans, Western Europeans or Americans to fight this? So, but when you said that, they would not have any, and the state of Medina came into existence because of this alliance between the Muslims, the non-Muslim Arabs, and the Jewish tribes of Medina. So then they will have no, because then they are denouncing their own prophet if they said they have no. So that I think is a very good strategy.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.